بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وبه نستعين السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. This is an unplanned, I might add, fourth talk which I accepted for in order to complete the continuity of the theme of reflections on the rising of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Before I continue, I'd like to make a personal statement. I usually don't give talks in public, and the reason why I took on this thankful task is really threefold. The first is to do obviously with the month of Muharram and the great benefit at all levels, at the physical, mental and spiritual, that comes to those who remember and recollect and reflect on the Imam. And I think that becomes amplified if it's done in the company of like-minded lovers of Allah and lovers of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. The second reason is more to do with the Khoja Ithna Ashari community, and I would like to register here my thanks and deep gratitude for the position taken by this community in support of all those who had to leave their countries in the 1970s, 80s and 90s, and especially of course Iraqis. You extended your hands of friendship and support and help in a selfless and wonderful way. And inshallah, Allah will reward you in this world and the next. And I would like to express my thanks to this community. The third reason really is to do with myself, and that is the theme that I chose was not one that I had prepared or rehearsed for, but it is really as a result of personal introspection over time. And whatever came out in the last three talks were, I hope, a reflection of the internal dialogue that I've had with myself in order to try to understand more the meaning and purpose behind the rising of the Imam and what it means in terms of time and in terms of non-time, in terms of this instant and in eternity. So this is the last of my reflections, and it is to do with why this great event has lingered on in time. There are no communities that I can think of that remember with such fervor and such deeply felt emotion events of 1500 years ago. There used to be certain cases of in other great religious traditions where events of this kind were remembered, but frankly by the 1940s and 50s they had died out. Even the passion plays associated with the Catholic Church are no longer played out with the same degree of commitment and fervor, and most of the symbols and heroic, I would use the word myths, but please don't understand it as legend. A myth is a fact that has been filtered through time to make its highlights intelligible. So a myth is not a legend. These these great symbols of great beings have not been, are no longer the stuff of religious belief in modern times. But the martyrdom of the Imam stays on. And I think it's a reflection really on both the commitment of those who follow in the lines of Ahlul Bayt, and also, and probably equally importantly, is the potency, the great drama, the great spiritual drama associated with the rising and the death of the Imam. After the Imam was martyred in Karbala, basically the Shia, at least their political aspect of them, retreated. There was a number of movements that arose immediately in the decades after that in one way or another tried to seek a form of revenge or restitution. The most famous one being the Tawabun movement, of those who were in Kufa but for one reason or another did not join the Imam in the struggle and felt a sense of profound remorse. This movement, maybe 2,000-3,000 people, tried to harass the Umayyad authorities, but without great success. And then that was followed soon after that by the rebellion of al-Mukhtar, which also carried with it the theme of restitution or vengeance for the martyrdom of Imam Hussein. And although the Mukhtar managed to track down and kill a number of those who were involved in Karbala on the Umayyad side, his rebellion was then crushed. And the direct consequence of the political and military consequence of the Karbala events basically died out. There were a number, of course, of rebellions and uprisings by those claiming to act for the household of the Prophet, but they were really not connected directly to the line of the Imams. The Imam Ali Zain al-Abidin did not seek any political restitution. He lived a life of quiet reflection and constant prayer and devotion, but he was recognized, of course, by most of the Shia as being the Imam of the line. The great rebellion of Imam Zayd ibn Ali was not backed by Imam Muhammad al-Baqir, and it was crushed again. And the main uprising that brought down the Umayyads had in it elements of revenge or restitution of the Ahlul Bayt. In fact, the claim of the rebels was to restore the rule of Bani Hashim and the Ahlul Bayt, but not understood in our sense. It included, by their reckoning, the followers of the Prophet's uncle, Abbas. And really the Shia, the Ithna Ashari Shia, basically, I would say, exited from political life for a long period thereafter. But the rites and the memory and the commemoration of the days of Karbala was a very important element in the social cohesiveness of the Ithna Ashari, well, before they became Ithna Asharis. And Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, and before him Imam Muhammad al-Baqir, called for majalis like this, where the events preceding and the martyrdom of the Imam was recollected. This aspect of it began to be publicly expressed in the 9th century, when a type of Shia dynasty ruled the Muslim world. The 9th century was actually, it is known as the Shia century, because the Buwayhid dynasty based in Baghdad were basically Zaydi Shias. The Fatimids were established in Egypt, and in Syria you had the Hamdanis. So the public expression, the rites, the marches, the processions began to be accepted publicly in that period. And this was really generally the state of affairs for a long time, in the sense that the Shia formed an elite. The Ithna Ashari Shi'ism was very much an elitist phenomenon. It didn't have significant mass appeal and was concentrated primarily in Iraq and in other pockets in the Middle East, in the Arab Middle East and in Iran. Until, of course, the establishment of the Safavid dynasty in Iran, which made Shi'ism, Ithna Ashari Shi'ism, the official religion of the state, and where the state became for the first time associated with the Ithna Ashari faith, the Ithna Ashari Muslim faith. So once it became established in the form of a government, or once state power was aligned to the Shia, it became obviously much more easy to hold majalis, to express the rituals, and these became basically what we see around us as the rituals of Muharram, and the commemoration of Muharram may have been rooted in the practices of the first 1 or 2 centuries after the death of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, but they took on this shape about 300 or 400 years ago. But this doesn't really explain why these symbols continue. And of course, as we move from generation to generation, the memory of the event becomes less and less. So it has to be given different kinds of representations so that the mass of people can relate to it. And here we come to the issue of the historicity, as it were, the historical events of Karbala, whether there were enough eyewitnesses of the time to authenticate them historically, and whatever came up a few decades afterwards, was that what people understood to be the events of Karbala? The answer, I think, is really clearly no. I mean, I'm sure I know that you're reading Abu Mikhnaf, but to make the connection between Abu Mikhnaf and these commemorations and rituals, it's a very, very big leap. Here you have a dry history, basically a chronology of events, and in it seems to be thrown in all kinds of extraneous factors about the sky turning red and the sand drenched in blood, that somehow doesn't seem to fit into a rational explanation of the events of Karbala. But in reality, I think this is a complete misreading of what pivotal events of this kind, sacred events, and that's what I've been trying to say in the last 3 talks, is that the events of Karbala, once you reduce them to history or to theology, you have basically destroyed or went a long way in destroying their sacredness. We cannot be expected to relate to a historical text. All of us relate to the Imam in his heroic figure, his redemptive figure, or his imami figure. We don't relate to him in the form of a textual reading of a book. It's very important to know the events textually. But the symbol of Imam Hussein alayhi salam did not survive because of the historic, because of the work of historians, whether Tabari or Ibn al-Athir or Abu Mikhnaf and so on. And the same thing goes through for the significance of Karbala, and in another space of Najaf. I'm sure you've come across the idea of Najaf or Karbala being the center, as it were, the center of the world. And sometimes in my youth I used to listen to these Rozakhun talking about the ark of Nabi Allah Nuh being in Najaf. And I used to smirk and laugh because it did not make sense. I mean, where is the evidence that the ark was there? Of course, with time, I began to understand that what that speaker, he may have believed it as a literal event, but what that speaker was referring to was the sacredness of the place. And when we talk about sacred places, we're talking about basically centers that connect the terrestrial world with the celestial space. Mecca is like that. Mecca is as is known in it's a Latin term, axis mundi. It's the axis of the world. It's the connection between the entire spectrum of creation with the world of the unseen. And it is an axis that comes symbolically. And similarly in Karbala, there's a line that goes, we don't see it. Our minds cannot visualize it. But it is the line that goes through the sacred place that connects all of the events and their meanings with the higher spheres. And the same thing holds true for Najaf. So when I hear people talking about these towns and places as being centers of the world or centers of the universe or the eye of creation, I don't laugh anymore. I don't think I know better. The truth of the matter is that from one perspective, which is a perspective of that is luminous and insubstantial. Insubstantial not in the sense of being small, but in the sense of having no material substance. These realities are as real to me as if somebody points out Nelson's column in Trafalgar Square. So all of these events and acts, in order for them to have this kind of longevity in time, they have to be what I would call them spiritually authentic. If they're not spiritually authentic, they would not survive. They cannot survive. They will not be able to survive. So the authenticity of the events of Karbala are to a large extent dependent on the way that people commemorate it and the continuity of the commemoration. So it's like a mirror that you hold. If at some point nobody celebrates or commemorates any of these sacred events, then that mirror is no longer there. The event no longer has a reality in time and space, but it has a reality in the wider spectrum of the universe. So these are the various points, the axes, which under very, very extraordinary conditions, as it were, the sky, the celestial heavens open up, and the axis is made, the connection is made. And that's why when people go to visit, that's why visitation, ziyarah, is important. Ziyarah is not only important in the outer sense that you reaffirm your commitment to the Ahlul Bayt, but it's also to see this invisible axis that gives the sacredness to this event. And therefore, it is not any old event in time. It's not like riding, the number 9 bus. It is an event that is connected to the unseen through this axis mundi. And I might add, this is also found in other great religious traditions. The connection between the place, the event, and the sacredness of the place and the event. So they also, the Quran, again, whatever I say, I hope I can find a reference to it in the Quran al-Karim, because ultimately, as I said, there's only two scales that we have to weigh our understanding of reality: the sacred text and the ways and actions of perfected beings. The reference to Mecca as being al-Qura, the mother of cities, is to do with that. It's also known as Bakka. It's a place where people break down in tears. Nabi Allah Ibrahim did the sacrifice, not in Mecca, but in Bakka, if you read the Quran. And Bakka and Buka, they are the same, they have the same root. So the sacredness of these places is really a true reflection of the Quranic sanction given to treating them as sacred places. And again, a lot of the actions that we commemorate in Karbala have also this sacred dimension to them. I don't want to get into the more provocative ones like tatbir and so on, but if you read the recitation as you come on, there's always the certain rituals and certain actions. For example, the act of marriage takes place during or just before a sacred event takes place. And I think if you read any of the maqtals, there is a marriage scene in there. These are all elements, I think, that connect human beings, not only to the pathos of the event, not only to its tragedy, but to its sacred dimension. And one of the factors, one of the reasons, I don't use that word, but anyway, one of the reasons behind the continuity of the passion of Karbala in the heroic mold is that a lot of these things are repeated again. For example, the clash between Banu Hashim and the Umayyads, Banu Abd Shams. This was going on before prophetic times. It is a kind of cosmic struggle between good and evil. I'm sure there were a number of good people in the Umayyads and amongst the Abd Shams, but this theme repeats itself in nearly all the great spiritual traditions, is that you have themes of good and evil fighting, clashing, confronting, and then coming to a kind of physical clash in which one side prevails over the other, but then ultimately good will prevail over evil. In the events of Karbala, seen in terms of this sort of cosmic battle between the family of the Prophet before the Prophet, the Banu Hashim, and the family of Yazid, the Banu Umayyah, the Abd Shams. These wars were going on. They come into a sacred confrontation, which doesn't tell the whole story. The story continues. We're all waiting now for, as it were, for the second chapter of this story, or the final chapter, which is then when the Imam Sahib Zaman ﷺ ends this struggle by decisively destroying the enemies of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So these are all symbols that are the basis of what makes things long-lasting. Repetition by itself and constantly being told about something doesn't make it long-lasting. A lot of the myths and symbols of the major religions, especially Christianity, have basically broken down because they've been subjected to both the rules of history, which is that they're time dependent. So everybody's asked for evidence. Show me evidence for this. Prove that this is what has happened. Apply the rules of historiography to it. What is your methodology? Once you apply these human scale of assessment to sacred events, you will destroy that event itself, and the fate will be no different from what has happened to, unfortunately, to some of the other great religious traditions. It is not that sacredness is an enemy of reason, it's not. But a mind that only sees in terms of the linear progress of events, when confronted with sacred events, and applies these rules, it always is the case that the gross overwhelms the subtle. This is an axiom. You cannot do your salat if you have a toothache. I mean, I'll say that as a matter of fact. So we have to preserve not only the memory and the commemoration, but every time somebody tries to bring it down to purely historicist factors or purely to socio-cultural factors or revolutionary factors or redemption, which is a major theme these days, Imam Hussein as a redeemer, you have to put your foot down and say this is insufficient, and I will not allow that to crowd out the symbolic and mythological aspects of the Imam's martyrdom. It's just very clear that there's no way that you can relate to history and to events in time of a sacred nature except through symbol and myth. There's just no other way. Because if you're a historian or if you're a theologian, you can think about ideas and start playing with ideas and so on. But if you want to internalize that, it is absolutely necessary that you maintain the symbols, the rumuz, or the isharat, or the mithal, as the Quran says. These are all mithals. We must not destroy the mithal in the name of reason, or in the name of historical research, or in the name of accuracy. Of course, that doesn't mean we should not be accurate, and that doesn't mean we should not be concerned with true narrative. Of course we should be. But they are insufficient as in ways of explaining the ways of the unseen. So our memory as followers of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, and our memory as rooted mu'mins and Muslims, is to accept the symbolic and the heroic nature of the events in preference to other interpretations that exclude that. And there's also another element in the Karbala event, which is to do with the cyclical time. There is an element of returning back to it. We all know that it has not ended. The story is not yet over. The end result is not seen. If you believe in just a linear progress, you will come to a stop and say, well, this has happened and let's move on. And the events of yesterday are today's memory, and the events of today are tomorrow's afterthought. But in reality, if your view of time is cyclical, which I must say mine is, it is not. When I say time, I'm talking about time in its cosmic sense, not in terms of what's the time today. Obviously, 9 o'clock comes after 8 o'clock, but the events, sacred events, are not limited to linear time. Sacred events are part of cyclical time, and they leave issues that are the core of the human experience, of the human condition, basically unresolved until the cycle comes to an end. Usually before the end of each cycle of time, things look very, very dark. Things look very bleak. There is no relationship with the origin. People bemoan the loss of faith. People bemoan the loss of certainty. People bemoan all kinds of things. But that is, as it were, the darkness before the dawn. If we are believers in Allah's justice, in time, then the cyclicality of the event will be redeemed, as it were, by the appearance of the Imam Sahib Zaman. Now, the appearance may not be in physical time, I might add, but it is to do with changing, of restitution, of putting things back in balance. The justice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not allow injustice to continue into eternity. It's just not possible. Of course, out of time and space, all is justice. There is no injustice outside of time and space. But in time and space, for the cycle to end, the balance has to be restored. And if we don't restore the balance, somebody else will. Some other force will. So this is another very powerful symbol, I think, of Karbala, that it leaves with us the sense that the game is not over. That's why we're here. I mean, we're not here just to, commemorate some events of 1400 years ago, or to re-establish our loyalty and our allegiance. We're here because we know this is not over, and we will not allow it to be over. And once we raise the flag is that we will be on this path until justice is restored in this cycle of time. So I think one of the difference between Shia Muslims and other Muslims is that we don't believe that history is a succession of events that are irreversible. We cannot believe that. If we believe that, and that is by the way, this is the way that the modern mind works, is that what has happened is gone and tomorrow is another day. Now I'm not talking about vendettas and vengeance and things like that. I mean, this is really a trivialization of the idea of redressing imbalances. Vendettas and vengeance and revenge killings and so on are horrible things, and they have nothing to do with the restitution of justice. And I'm afraid also a lot of the reasons why some of our theologians give for the return of the Imam Sahib Zaman is to do with vengeance, and is to do with slaughtering all those. Basically, the graves will be those in the graves who are responsible for the slaughter, and those who refuse to accept the Imam Khilafah will be dredged up from their graves and then brought to life and killed again. This, I think, is a real trivialization of what the restitution of justice is. I don't think we are here in order to make sure that sometime in the future somebody will resurrect Shimmer and then cut his neck off. I mean, Shimmer is gone to his Dar al-Qarar. But our job is to keep the idea of restitution of injustice to justice absolutely open and through all time and space. And we will reject, therefore, as believers in the Imams of Ahlul Bayt and in the Prophet ﷺ, who is the peak and the apogee of this. He occupies a station both of imamah and of prophethood, which is a higher station. You cannot look at it except that time will revert back in order for the opportunity to arise to redress injustices. So this to me is one of the reflections of this month, is that this is the reason, I suppose, or the meta reason for the suffering of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. It is to create what would normally have been a minor battle with some heroic antics into a sacred event of universal importance. And it is also to do with the idea that I keep on coming back to, that is, how does Tawheed work through history? And it works this way, by keeping the options open to see all events and all phenomena and all actions in both the light of space and time and the light of reason and the greater light of illumination that comes from the connection with the unseen. Another I think powerful symbol of the days of Karbala is the sense of great loss of what could have been. What could have been was, we say to ourselves, if by some divine intervention in the battle things turned and Imam Hussein alayhi salam established his rule, would that rule not have opened up basically the pre-rule before the end of time? Because the rule of the perfect man, if it continues for any length of time, then removes injustice, removes oppression, removes imbalances, and creates basically the perfect ordered society that is content with itself and content with its creator, and its creator is content with it. At that point, time ends. So there's a sense of nostalgia, I think, at least I feel that, is that the golden age of Islam, if you talk to any of our brothers, our Sunni brothers, they will probably think of the Medina of the Prophet ﷺ. I will think of that too, but I'll also think of the Kufa of Imam Ali. But the Kufa of Imam Ali ﷺ was not from an outer situation, was not a very happy state of affairs. It was there's constant warfare, there's constant imbalances, there's constant killings, and in the end, the Imam, after a very short period, I think he ruled for about 3 or 4 years, is murdered by this brutal assassin, Ibn Maljam. So the golden age is also of what could have been. This sense of nostalgia, it is not nostalgia, it is a sense of, it's a sacred nostalgia. It's a sense of what could have been, where our ancestors more attuned to the demands of life and work under a perfected rule. So there is what could have been, and what was of course Allah's will. So this keeps also the memory of the memory of events of Karbala, seen in terms of the potential golden age that we could have had and experienced before the end of time. Something I think that is a very powerful symbol. So if you're going to look at this whole spectrum in terms of it's how do you interiorize, as it were, the events of Karbala. And I've tried in the last 3 lectures, is to have a predilection or predisposition to looking at it in terms of the ideal, looking at it in terms of archetypes, to look at it in terms of symbols, to look at it in terms of the action of sacred heroes, to look at the myth of Karbala in the sense of being the act of great men with a sacred character that has been filtered through or has come down for the last 1400 and 1400 odd years, rather than to look at it in historical terms, or to look at it in social terms, or to look at it even in religious terms. Because all of this, I think, begins to reduce the cosmic significance of the events of Karbala. The other aspect of it, I might add, is it has also made me think more about what is unique about the Islam of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, and therefore by inference what is unique in our way of looking at our deen. Now, of course, at the exoteric level, there's no very little difference between all the schools of Islam. But I do not want to see the world of the Shia discard the esoteric features, the features that give it its uniqueness, the features that are basically the supra-rational features that distinguishes Shia Islam. Shia Islam is in very, very many ways a mystical religion. It's a religion that deals also with the intangible, that deals with the non-sensed. The entire idea of the Imams, imamology, if you want to call it that, the ideal, is rooted outside of the realm of reason. It's rooted outside of the realm of direct experience. It is situated somewhere else. And our entire religion is in fact our understanding of Islam in its inner dimensions is to do with this understanding the symbols, and any attempt to just to reduce it to reason and to rational explanation, I think will go a long way to destroying its foundations. Now, I don't want to get into this akhbari, usuli business, which I think is really a red herring, and it has nothing to do with us. It's to do with the divisions between various theosophists and theologians. I'm talking about those who have the capacity to engage with the deen in both its outer dimensions, its exoteric dimensions, and its inner reality. And in my case, I had probably the most rationalist education you could have. Also in Iraq, religion in its esoteric dimension is very, very weak. You have to go, I think, to Iran to be able to see the mystical dimensions of Islam in a greater reality. So it is once you start reflecting and once you start cultivating what we talked about earlier in the last talk about these inner faculties, then these things begin to take a life of their own. The symbols of Shi'ism become really your gateway, as it were, to the unseen. And to answer one of the brothers yesterday, or the day before, I forgot, is, well, how do you engage with that, with the esoteric aspect? And I think by taking the symbols seriously, and not subjecting them to the rather discourteous rule of your mind, of your reason. If you treat these symbols seriously and rebalance your inner condition with your outer condition, you will find that you will have access to the let's call it what it is, to the divine, much more than what your reason will tell you. Your reason will tell you that your access to the divine is your unconscious. Well, I think it's ridiculous neo-Freudian stuff that has beclouded the minds of modern people. The mixture of scienticism, psychology, sociology, brought to the world of the sacred has had no effect apart from destroying the sacredness of the world. Anybody who's been in this country, I've been in this country on and off for a few decades, also the United States. There was, even in these places which have been overwhelmed by the materialist consumer society and by a progressive negation of the unseen, the world had some dimension of knowledge of the sacred before, but that doesn't. And the Middle East, the Muslim world in general, is going in that direction. I say that, so this idea, of the East is spiritual and the West is material, is a lot of nonsense. The East has engrossed in this modernist way of conceiving reality as the West is. The West is trying in some areas and spots here and there to find another dimension to engage with what is not substantial. So we cannot really seek truth, which is what the basis of the message of the Imams of Ahl Bayt and the Quran al-Kareem, except by looking. If you look for haqq, you're not going to find it in material aspirations or in emotions or in sentimentalism. You have to look for it somewhere else. And the modernist mindset, when it does deal with what is insubstantial, looks at it in emotional terms and sentimental terms also. So religion becomes a sentimental affair. It becomes one of, again, please don't get me wrong, I'm not saying you should not shed tears, but you should not only shed tears. So recovering the sacred through the paths of the Imams of Ahl Bayt in order to perfect your deen and to perfect your Islam and to be true to the prophetic way, you have to re-engage, I think, with the symbols of the deen. And even though you may not think of them as, it may be a bit of a leap, but I can't think of any other way. I'm just giving you my own experience here. The first thing, I mean, there's a huge number of symbols that one has to recover. I've listed about 22 of them, but I'll not bore you with them. But the first one is to understand that the meanings of all things, the ascription of value to all things, does not lie in the material. Does not. When I say the material, I don't mean just things, but in the outer dimensions. The principles of them all are all in a different dimension. What we see are their manifestations. It is not. Usually, people see it the other way around. You see truth by seeing a person act truthfully, or you see goodness by a person acting kindly, or you see generosity by somebody taking a pound from his pocket and dropping it in a collection box. That's how we relate to these archetypes. Actually, it's the other way around. You have to. I said that you have to invert your thought. You have to invert the way that you look at the world. We have to understand the meaning of sacred words in the Quran. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, kun, be, we must take that as a command to creation. It is not just another word, kun fayakun. It is the original sound out of which creation tumbled. And as-Sami' al-Mujib is that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hears the echo of the kun when from creation. So you have to think of all existent matters as the way that speech comes out of my mouth as a result of my thinking. Well, existence is that as a result of, we don't know, I mean, no one knows Allah but Allah. But Allah is a creator, as a khaliq. It creates everything. So we have to be courteous to the words in the sacred text. The third thing to recover the knowledge of how to engage with the sacred is to know the sacred language of Arabic. Not the language of the Arabs, but the sacred language that is Arabic. And the Quranic Arabic, because it's a sacred text, we must accept that it is a reflection of the primordial language, the original universal grammar, the universal spiritual grammar, out of which language came. So if the Quran is a revealed text, and if it is, and going back to yesterday's talk, that if faith implies uncritical acknowledgement of the sacredness of the Quran, then the language there is not the language of I don't know, Imru al-Qais or Muhallaqat or whoever. It's the language that was chosen as a building block for us to deal with the sacred. And it has two elements to it. The structure, we call that al-Mabani, and the signification, which is the Ma'ani. And that is one of the elements of the talk here is purpose and meaning. So when we read the ayah regarding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, if all the trees were pens and all the sea was ink, we have to ask ourselves, how does the divine pen write the sacred language? I mean, don't just read it as an ayah, look into its ta'weel. Don't visualize a big pen writing things, but see the action of a pen on a tablet of uncreated matter, a tablet of Adam. The rest are in no particular order, but I'll just mention them in the interest of time. One of them is to do with visualizing angelic forces, not in terms of people flapping wings and so on, but in terms of bridges between one state and the next, one form of creation and the next. And here it helps, frankly, to look at the birds. The Quran talks about Mantaq al-Tayr, and Nabiullah Sulaiman could speak to the birds. Well, he couldn't speak to them in a tweet. It's not some of these, what do you call this thing, Twitter or whatever it is. Twitter. He spoke, Mantaq al-Tayr is the principle of the birds as symbols of the angelic forces and symbols also of the soul in flight. And there's 3 ayahs in the Quran that talk about the angelic forces lined up as if they were birds. So if you want to see what are the connecting elements between existence and physical existence and the luminous existence, think of the angels as a kind of transfer mechanism, as a kind of switch. They are basically a potential. If any of you are engineers or physicists, they're a potential, 2 different, like hydraulic levels. They connect elements. And the Quran says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَالصَّافَاتِ صَفًّا فَالزَّاجِرَاتِ زَجْرًا فَالتَّالِيَاتِ ذِكْرًا. And by those ranged in ranks and who drive away and who recite the invocation. So we have the birds here as ranked and as souls. So look at birds and look at the freedom that they have and look at the way that they soar. That doesn't mean that they are all angels trapped in birds. Of course not. But it's a kind of mental aid that allows you to make these various steps. Also the birds, the language of the angels, as it were, is rhythmic speech. It's a form of sajah, which is the way that Imam Hussein alayhi salam wrote. It's the form of rhythmic, rhyming speech. So that, I think, is a very important form of connecting with the symbolic sacred language. Every time you go on ziyarah, every time you go on hajj, think of it as this axis mundi. Think of it as the pole that connects a sacred event with its mirror, not opposite but apposite in another dimension. Mecca, of course, is the ultimate sacred point. And Medina has its own enormous energy. The energy that you feel in Medina is not the energy that comes from a crowd. The sweetness that you feel in Medina is not the sweetness that comes. It's an amplification of the love and the devotion that we have to the Prophet ﷺ. So think of it that it flows up and down in a constant, never-ending stream. Look at flowers in that way too. Look at the rose. I mean, the great Persian poets, Hafiz and Attar and Sa'di and Sana'i and so on. They're much more advanced, I might add, than the Arabs in making this juxtaposition between flower and the object of desire. Look at geometric forms. Geometric forms also have their sacred nature. The cube of the Kaaba has I don't want to go into the numerology of it, but there is a certain sacredness to the way of the points of a cube. And if you go into the huruf side, again, the whole idea of numbers having any kind of sacred meaning has been lost, and the whole thing is seen as sort of mumbo jumbo, But in reality, if words are sacred, then the sequence of words are also sacred, and therefore the numbers associated with them can be reconfigured in ways. So look at the pattern of numbers. that point to infinity. I don't mean infinity in the mathematical sense, but infinity in the sense of the eternal. Colors. Why is the Imam's color green? What is red? What is white? There's a whole treatise written on this by Sahrawardi on the sacred colors. And it's been completely forgotten. But these are also ways by which at least the interaction with colors, the black light, there's something called the black light, which is the light that overwhelms before the actual light of sacredness and knowledge becomes. And these are all great. This is, if you look at the spectrum of outer light, from infrared to ultraviolet, there's another spectrum on the other side. The mysteries of the letters, the Quranic, I mean, you may spend your entire life trying to find out what Alif Lam Mim means, but in Surah Noon, it's clear that the sacredness of the letter Noon. If you put two of them together, you get a circle with a dot inside. And this is the most perfect shape in all symbols of all the great spiritual traditions. The circle is perfection, but the dot is where it all emanates from. You cannot draw a circle without a center. So take Noon, invert it, put it on top of it, you get the circle and a dot. The idea of sacred animals. There are sacred animals. I don't mean sacred animals in the sense you have to pray to them, but they have a certain function in the order of things. They make you remember certain conditions and state. The lion, for example. Why is Imam Ali called Asadullah? Why isn't he called Deebullah? Why isn't he called Nimrullah? These are all important points that you have to reflect on symbolically in order to regain part of the equipment that you need to engage with the unseen. Sword is another thing. Safe. Why? What is the symbolism of Dhul Fiqar? If somebody brings up Dhul Fiqar, everybody gets shivers. Why? So these are really very, very important visual aids, symbolic visual aids. The cave. Reflect on Surah Al-Kahf and what a cave means. What is a cave? It has an entrance, it is dark, but it has also an exit. And so on, I can go on about gates, why the atabat, buildings, sacred buildings. There might be kharabat, there might be ruins, or there might be just a brick standing. But your basira, your inner sight, sees other things in them. When you see a gate, you see the atabat, you see the thresholds. The importance of the octagon. In the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, I had the privilege of going there before the Israelis came in 1966. And that was one of my earliest experiences. Why is it an octagon? An octagon is the closest thing geometrically to a circle. And that has its own trees, the trees in the Quran. Zaytun, Tuba tree, Sidrat al-Muntaha. Waters, Marj al-Bahrain, the two oceans. These are so many symbols that we have, and the language of the deen is so rich in them, and Allah's lutf and grace is so immense, well, it's not measurable, that He has placed for us all kinds of signposts, athar, all kinds of pointers, and we ignore them. We ignore them at our own peril because we basically worship our intellect. We worship our own mind. We worship what we have created. And of course, I don't want to accuse anyone, but this is what the ancient Israelites were accused by Nabi Allah Musa. They kept on going back to what they created, which is Ba'al, their own calf. So, I'll conclude. I conclude by saying that the events of Karbala, the model of Karbala, the paradigm of Karbala, the archetypes of Karbala are as significant as you want to make them. And they are as resonant as you want to reverberate with them. And they are as eternal as we choose to engage with them as events that are ongoing, that don't, we are writing one of the chapters, the next generation will write the next chapter, and so on and so on and so on. And the revivification, revitalization of the dimension that allows us to engage with the unseen is essential for a true for being a true reflector of what the Imams expect from their followers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have time for a couple of questions.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much indeed for today's lecture and indeed for your series of lectures. It really has been quite enlightening, and especially thank you very much for your warm words at the beginning of your talk today. And I'd like to say on behalf of this community, that our lives have been enhanced and enlivened and made better through our relationship with the Iraqi community, and it continues to be so. We've made generational and lifetime friendships, which we hope will continue, inshallah, and that's a very positive thing. When one comes up against new concepts that you've made us look at and revisit our established thoughts and beliefs, and mostly it's been in the horizontal axis that we've looked at and reflected on the events of Karbala. One of the automatic defenses, as it were, is to actually protect and justify what you've always believed in and sustained as important. And you mentioned today about the redemptive nature of Imam Hussein's struggle and sacrifice. And I wanted to ask you if you think that there is a role for redemptive suffering in religion at all.
Well, of course there is. There's an entire world religion based on that, which is called Christianity. But Islam is not Christianity. Islam does not, the sins of the world are not redeemed by the passion of one person, because there is no sin in Islam. It's as simple as that. There are transgressions, but there are no sins. There are no sins from which people were. Adam did not leave because he committed a sin. He left because he was transgressed. Built. He was not cast out. So the wellsprings of Islam are different from Christianity, and to try to make the Imams of Ahlul Bayt a kind of a holy family, I think is also a disservice to the Imams. The Imams are not part of a trinity or part of some kind of addition or some kind of complexifying element in the faith. The Imams are Imams because there is a station called Imamah. There's a condition called Imamah, which needs to express itself, and it does express itself in time and place. So I cannot see how the Imam, he never attributed to himself a redemptive character. He never claimed that he was taking on the sins of the community. In the last three talks, I tried to give my understanding as to why he moved the way that he moved. There's a certain inevitability to it, and if you reduce the Imam to a redemptive quality, then basically you're talking about those who do not acknowledge that redemptive feature are somehow cast out. That's not the case. I mean, it cannot be the case. And it cannot be the case of Imama. Imama exists, as I said, irrespective of whether you and I believe in it. So I think Islam comes from a entirely different worldview. And those who want to see the Imam as involved in some kind of, I won't say hopeless, but some kind of desperate struggle, and voluntarily chose death in order to highlight the deficiencies in those who claimed they were practicing the religion, I don't think it really stacks up. I don't think so. But if you want to believe that, that's fine. I mean, I have no problem with that.
We'll take one more question. Is there a question from the lady's side?
Thank you, Dr. Allawi, for your speech again. There was just one question in my mind where you referred to the Arabic as a sacred language, because the Quran clearly was revealed in that. But my understanding was that the content is sacred rather than the language, because if God wanted to reveal to the Chinese, he would reveal in the Chinese language. So that doesn't make the language sacred. I think it's the content, or am I mistaken? To just clarify that.
Well, I'll try. I mean, the language of the Arabs is not sacred, but the Arabic of the Quran is sacred because it's embedded in the text. The reason why it's a sacred language, well, there is no reason. It's just in the fact that the text is in Arabic. Those letters, those ahruf, in themselves, as they construct words, take on a sacred character. There are not that many words in the Quran. There may be about 600 or 700 words that are significant. The reason why I say it's a sacred language, not Arabic, not the Arabic that I speak or Arabic speakers speak, but the Arabic of the Quran is sacred, is because it has certain modularity in its construction. Now, very few languages, the main Semitic languages have that. They are based on this root structure. So you can construct many variations on the basis of a few words. There are very few. If you take any word in Arabic, you can create out of that a whole chain of words. And each one has a different nuance and different meaning and different significance. Once you know these basic building blocks, then it is not that difficult, I think, to unlock most of the meanings of the Quran for those who have sight, who have both inner and outer sight. But I've never said that the language of the Arabs is sacred. I mean, that would imply the Arabs are sacred, which is obviously nonsense. But